You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of InkResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service. Welcome to the show, Ted.
Oh, it's great to be back, Jim, especially after the last 2 weeks in the stock market, capital markets around the world. We've had a lot of developments, and still more to come.
China, the big story perhaps, exports down there drastically, yet the government promises they'll have 6.9% growth this year. Well,
and of course they will get it officially. Whether it is real or not, of course, is up for debate. But the big news out of China on the weekend was, in my view, their pledge not to enter into a massive currency devaluation. And for those who were expecting the global economy to tumble into a deflationary spiral, this is going to work against that thesis for the time being. We sent out a report to our clients on Monday entitled, "Inflation Deferred as China Doubles Down on Debt." So that's not to say that eventually we can't play out into a deflationary sequence of events tipped off by China, but at this point, China's basically saying, look, if there's going to be an unraveling here in the global economy, it ain't going to be us that you're going to be able to blame it on. And so they're being quite smart about it from, I think, a PR perspective, and more than just that, from as much as they can an economic perspective. But of course, there are many things they can control, and global trade is one of them. And as you mentioned, they reported a tumble in exports for the second month this year. So there's clearly some major headwinds in the global economy. The encouraging news out of China, though, is that they're not going to be in a rush to devalue. Now, we had this G20 meeting the weekend before, which was a total flop. We couldn't agree on anything except basically we're not going to devalue. No country's going to devalue, and basically try and steal growth from another country. Well, of course, they've said this over and over again every time they meet, and that hasn't stopped the Bank of Japan, that hasn't stopped the Bank of Canada, that hasn't stopped the ECB from trying to win the race to the bottom. So at least China they were the host of the G20, and at least they're holding so far to the spirit of that. Now, we have the Bank of Canada this week, and Stephen Poloz, a central banker who never met an interest rate cut he didn't like. He's part of the race to the bottom crowd that if he were teaching a cooking class in elementary school, he'd split the class up into a set of tables, maybe 4 kids at a table, and he'd say, okay, so we're gonna have this cooking class, and we're gonna bake pies. Now, the way you win this contest is the table that has the smallest pie wins. And of course, because the pie is so small, then everyone at the table then has to fight over who gets that piece of the pie. And the student who ends up with the biggest piece of the smallest pie in the room wins the cooking contest. I mean, that is the type of economic policy that we've got from the Bank of Canada. And so it's really disappointing that the Bank of Canada and the ECB and the Bank of Japan are able to basically try and stick handle their societies down these roads with hardly any accountability. Now, I say that the Bank of Japan governor is in Parliament nearly every day. Now, our Bank of Canada governor hardly ever goes to Parliament, and I'm not sure even if he did what good it would do, because the type of questions you get are usually worse than the answers that are provided. So, I think eventually people are going to start to wake up to the damage that central banks are doing to societies, and I think that we've reached the point now where they are net negatives. The Bank of Japan earlier this year tried to devalue before the G20. It backfired. The yen soared, and I think that sort of put all these central bankers on the ones who are aware and who are thinking. We'll see what happens this week from our own central bank and the ECB, that they've probably reached the limits of how much meddling they can do in the economy without having things backfire. So I haven't got a great, my expectations are quite low for the Bank of Canada meeting. They have been, ever since basically Polos has established his modus operandi at the bank. Hopefully I'll be pleasantly surprised that he won't come out and try and devalue us again back to prosperity, which is a totally failed third world policy, which unfortunately he seems to believe quite strongly in. But the big elephant in the room this week will be the ECB, Mario Draghi. What's he going to do? There's lots of calls, particularly from Goldman Sachs, to do more QE, to meddle in the economy and the capital markets more. So we'll see what Mario Draghi does, and he's already basically put the banking sector in Europe onto a path of total annihilation with negative interest rates. It's totally creaming of the profitability, and so here we have the crazy scenario where you have a central bank that only a few years ago was trying to rescue the financial system in Europe from collapse, is now imposed policies which is about to bring potential another hit, if not collapse, to the banking system. So it's all gone full circle. We're really kind of reached a point of near I'm going to say policy lunacy coming from these central banks. They've got to just realize that they've done it, that they can't do any more without inflicting a lot of harm onto their societies. So we'll see what happens from Europe. If these central banks would just step back and stop being so active and let markets clear and provide stability so that business people could make decisions and not have to worry about the next wild surprise coming from Japan or the ECB or the Bank of Canada, then maybe we would see a pickup in business investment and productivity. But until we get some stability, until we get these academics and these bureaucrats and these central banks to calm down, we're going to have tough times. Now that's not going to be a panacea. That's not going to deliver stronger growth. But I think it's a necessary step, in order to get that. So, we'll see what Mario Draghi does this week, and hopefully he'll disappoint those who are, such as Goldman Sachs, who are demanding more quantitative easing because it's going to benefit the few, but it's going to really add more uncertainty to capital markets, which is the last thing we need.
Who is the brilliant person in the Canadian government who decided to sell off the very last of our gold reserves? And no doubt when they did it, they melted down precious gold coins that had a much higher collector value than they did purely as bullion. I know there was an outcry when Stephen Harper planned to do it, but is that what they eventually did?
Well, this has been going on for a number of years, but what we have to understand that Canadian FX foreign exchange reserves are a little different. Well, this is a little different. The way they're managed is more or less like a hedge fund. These are not stockpiles of savings that the government has for a rainy day. No. They finance these reserves. These are borrowed reserves. So the thinking behind getting rid of gold is that, they don't earn any interest, and they try and make a profit on these FX reserves by borrowing at one rate and then managing at a higher rate. So in terms of the rate of return. And I think the last report I saw, there was just under a 1% return on the FX reserves. So these are not rainy day funds, okay? Canadians don't have a lot of rainy day funds in terms of reserves by their central government. And so we should clear that myth up right away, that these are borrowed reserves, and Canada basically, though, has the benefit of having a number of gold reserves in the ground that if worse came to worse, I guess governments could access it, but that would be in a real worst case scenario.
Oh, but it's one thing to have it in hand and another thing to have it in the ground. I mean, I guess the oil guys are really rich then.
Not as rich as they were, of course, a few years ago. But to look at the sell-off in the gold reserves, you have to look at the way our whole reserve system is managed. And the fact of the matter is, it's being managed like a hedge fund. That then the objective is to earn a little bit of interest every year on that, and not lose money, and to have enough liquid assets there in case there's an emergency to go and intervene in the market. So I'm not defending the sell-off of the reserves. I just don't want listeners to think that, our rainy day war chest is being, sold, the gold is being sold off. We don't have a rainy day war chest. I mean, let's just get by that concept, off the top.
Okay, no rainy day fund. Well, we know in Alberta how well that worked. They spent it. And now they need it. They don't have it.
Alberta, has a smaller population than British Columbia, but every year their government spent more money than British Columbia. And it's as simple as that.
Like I said, they had a rainy day fund and it's gone. Yeah. And now the rain is falling.
And so, I hear commentators picking on the NDP government, and I'm not a big fan of the NDP, but, to blame Rachel Notley for all these problems, this is ridiculous. This has been going on for years.
Yeah, over 40 years.
Absolutely.
We'll have more with Ted Dixon right after this.
Bird Dog, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon & Garfunkel. Coming to Mission, White Rock, West Vancouver. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ted Dixon. Ted, the Chinese government says it's willing to run up a huge deficit this year as long as it keeps people at work. Is that the same kind of policy that we're seeing out of Ottawa?
Well, they're promising to run 3% deficit, which is the same as the Eurozone treaty limit. So it's not that big. Where the real deficit spending will come is in the private and public sectors, which can really be quite substantial. And boy, if we got to a 3% the GDP deficit in Canada, that would be quite large. I don't think we're going to see that. But it would really kickstart the economy in the short term, and I say in the short term because you're going to throw that kind of money in, and you're going to get some kind of a boost. But if it's all wasted and the like, then that will just be self-defeating. So we'll have to see what's going on in the budget. But in general, the approach that the federal government is on is what the G20 finance minister said a country should do. Now, none of them agreed to do it in terms of a team effort. There was no team effort at the G20 to do this, but Canada is going down the path that policymakers at the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland and the G20, have basically said is the best approach at this point, not to rely on central banks, but if you have borrowing capacity, look for productive investments, and I say productive investments, not spending money on fountains and make-work programs, okay? And, use the borrowing power that you have and invest in productive investments. So we'll see that the proof will be in the execution of their deficit spending, and I would encourage the Conservatives and the NDP and opposition to stop, particularly the Conservatives, stop having a hissy fit over deficit spending because, if you're going to balance the budget in a slow growth economy, then you're just throwing the ball back to the central banks, and the Conservatives have to be honest about that. And of course, they never talk about that side of the equation. So focus on the execution of this deficit spending. Is it being spent wisely? Are Canadians getting the right bang for the buck? Is it going into projects that make sense? Are these productivity-enhancing projects? Or are they make-work projects? If they're make-work projects and glorified pork barrel projects for Liberal Party hacks, then that would be bad. If they're productivity enhancing, if they make our cities more competitive, then those are good projects. So let's hold the government account to the type of investments it's making. Is it investing or is it spending? And if it's deficit spending, that's one thing. It's not as good as investing. And so, hopefully the opposition parties will focus in on the type of expenditures that are being planned and the way those expenditures will be made.
Well, I could see how traffic infrastructure improvements in Greater Vancouver would help a lot. The trucking industry says it costs the economy $3 billion a year because of the gridlock in Vancouver. So a rapid transit line to the University of British Columbia, which is along the busiest transit corridor in Canada. It's supplied with buses. They can't put any more buses on the Broadway route because there isn't room for them. So that would make complete sense. Making sure that we have smooth flow to the ports around Vancouver, that would make sense for the whole Canadian economy because we're the biggest port in Canada.
The Port of Vancouver is one of the most strategic industrial assets that Canada has, and any investment that makes that port more competitive with the U.S. ports, is something that should be considered. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And again, this is the job of the opposition, to hold the government accountable for what it's using taxpayers' dollars for. But, to go and say, well, we should balance the budget. Look, Jim, any socialist can balance the budget. The NDP promised to balance the budget. Balancing the budget is not going to necessarily grow your wealth, especially if you balance it in a way that redistributes income, into all sorts of different industries that are not necessarily the most productive. Okay? So, I hope that the Conservatives, along with their leadership contest, can move this debate to a higher level that looks at increasing our productivity and the long-term competitiveness of Canada. And just this mantra of balancing the budget, is not enough. I mean, it's not. Just because you can balance the budget doesn't mean you're going to be more competitive in the global economy. There seems to be this assumption amongst a group of conservatives, and not just in Canada but in the United States, that balancing the budget is somehow going to make your society better off. Well, you can balance the budget a whole bunch of different ways, including raising taxes and cutting important expenditures. So. Let's really zero in on how these funds are going to be spent.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held meetings with the premiers. Held a meeting. Harper didn't do that. He hated to hear different points of view.
Well, it's a different style, and the proof will be in the pudding, of course. So the climate change file is a difficult one. I think that. The Premier here did manage to play an important role in at least moving towards a definition of how you price carbon. I think, the pundits maybe came away, a little bit cynical with the results of that. I think it is hard to get under our system all the provinces on one page. The fact that they seem to have a framework to move, to develop to get an agreement on how to price carbon, is a good step in the right direction. We haven't done much on climate change for 10 years. To assume that Justin Trudeau is going to be able to come in and do it, in 6 months is just a little too ambitious, I think. So let's see how it plays out. But I think Christy Clark deserves some credit in the role she played, and it's moving in the right direction. But we certainly have got a long ways to go before Canada's climate change strategy is fully fleshed out.
But there's still that war of words between Alberta and BC. Alberta saying it's not fair. BC wants to get some of the economic benefit of any oil that we ship through the West Coast. And in retaliation, we won't take any of BC's hydropower. Is that short-sighted?
Well, it's each premier looking after their own base, and you're seeing more and more of that. And I believe that part of that is a reflection of the state of years and years of offloading some, and this goes beyond just the previous government. It goes, we saw that in the previous Liberal government, where more and more of the burden was placed on the provinces to provide services, and part of the demographics along with health. So these premiers are under a lot of pressure to look after their own constituencies, and now you're even seeing it on the EastWest Pipeline, where you have the mayors in Quebec getting into the act, and so this is a big challenge for the federal government, trying to get everybody on the same page, and it's certainly not going to be easy.
Well, when it comes to the environment, the mayors in the Montreal area say we don't want a pipeline. On the other hand, they're willing to accept single-hulled oil tankers bringing oil in from Saudi Arabia. Now, what's more of a risk to the environment? Well,
they don't seem to mind having trains full of tankers. I mean, it's just a lot of it's posturing, and it's ridiculous, and it's I think the municipal politicians, the federal government can deal with pretty quickly, but the provincial governments are a much tougher case.
Well, I was just taking a look at a map. If Quebec doesn't want the pipeline, they could route it through the U.S.
There is a pipeline that already goes through the U.S. Enbridge. Well, it goes from Montreal to Portland, and but they run into a case of the South Portland City Council has blocked the permits to allow the pipeline to be basically reversed so that Canadian crude can be exported out of Portland, Maine, and so this is now before the courts. So there is a pipeline that goes from Montreal to Maine. It's American municipality that stopped it. So it's not just in Canada that you've got cities playing these games. It used to be in the day cities focused on their knitting, changing the street lamps, paving the roads, but it's much more entertaining, I guess, for these city councilors. They can justify bigger salaries if they take on global issues such as nuclear disarmament and banning crude oil from the Alberta oil sands.
Well, remember the signs going into Vancouver, an atomic weapons-free zone? I said, really? Yeah. The U.S. Navy parks here, did they, download all their nukes?
No, it's just ridiculous, and it's just, it's just posturing by these local politicians, and maybe we'll get a movement in Vancouver to get back to basics. That would be good. In any city, it would be good, to have city councils focus on the basics. I think you got that to some extent in Toronto with John Tory, who has has the intellectual and the political stamina to take on any issue he wants. But he's focusing on what a city should focus on: getting better transit, making sure the traffic flows properly. And as far as I know, he's being rewarded with fairly strong popularity in Toronto for sticking to his knitting. So, hopefully we'll see more and more mayors like that who focus in on what their constitutionally allocated responsibilities are, and that's to keep the local infrastructure operating properly.
Well, silly Vancouver Council. I was a city council reporter when they passed a bylaw that banned weapons of mass destruction from the moon. Now, what kind of jurisdiction do they have over the moon? Well,
one has heard certain descriptions of the current administration with respect to the moon, but we'll just leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. Ted, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Have a good day, Jim.
My guest has been Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of InkResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.